Welcome to Epithets, exploring the sacred titles of Hecate.
Hey everyone, welcome to Epithets. We are exploring the sacred titles of Hecate. I am your co-host, Isaac Vars,
And I'm your other co-host, Robin Silverman.
and today we're talking about the epithet Brimo. Robin, what does Brimo mean?
Brimo means angry or terrifying. And it also has this implication of loudness. There's these sort of words derivative of it that mean things like the roaring of lions. So there's this idea of this sort of loud, terrifying roaring. I kind of think of it as like the sound of a freight train or a tornado or a like tsunami. I've never heard of tsunami, but I can imagine. And just that sort of that force, that loud, terrifying force. But yeah, it means angry and terrifying. There's actually some authors who have related also to the word bromos, which is like the crackling of the fire. So when that roaring, also you might think of like the roaring of a bonfire, right? It's just really loud, scary, destructive sound that's associated with the word.
That's really cool. I did not know that, and I did not find that bit in my research. And that's really interesting, with her and her connection to torches and fire, to think that part of this, I like that
Yeah,
sideways thinking. I'm thinking it as the sound of fire,
yeah,
as well as that big scary sound and terrifying. Though I feel like a lot of the things we're going to be talking about definitely relate more to the terrifying
yeah.
aspect, But oh wow, that's really cool. Yeah, it's a epithet that is used by a few different deities in Greek mythology. Besides Hecate, Persephone, Demeter, specifically Demeter Erinyes, Cybele, the Furies. Get that, and the Furies totally makes sense because they're pretty Brimo-esque. They're terrifying.
They're terrifying.
You wouldn't want to get on their bad side. Um, and so, as well as a connection to the Eleusinian mysteries, which you wanted to kind of talk about a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely want to touch on that a little bit, but I think I want to start with Medea. Um,
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, because that's actually the earliest I was able to find. And again, if anybody finds anything earlier, I'd love to hear about it. But the earliest I really found was in the Argonautica by Apollonius Rhodius, which was written in about the 3rd century CE, which is the long poem about Jason and the Argonauts. And I'm not going to tell the whole story of Jason right now, but it's a long story and it features a witch named Medea. Um, Anybody who doesn't know it needs to run right out and read it right now. There's plenty of
Hmm.
popular versions out there as well, including several movies. But anyway, in the Argonautica of Apollonius Rhodius, Medea is a priestess of Hecate, besides being a witch. And the name Brimo comes up a few times, most interestingly, I think, in a spell that Medea does. And Medea is doing a spell to create a salve to make Jason immune from harm in an upcoming battle. And I'm going to read the whole thing because I think it's really cool. Medea wished to drive to the splendid temple of Hecate in Colchis. And while her handmaidens were getting the carriage ready, she took a magic ointment from her box. The salve was named after Prometheus. A man had only to smear it on his body after propitiating the only begotten maiden, that's Kore Monogenes, who refers to Hecate, after propitiating the only begotten maiden with a midnight offering, to become invulnerable by sword or fire, and for that day to surpass himself in strength and daring. It first appeared in a plant that sprang from the blood-like ichor of Prometheus in his torment, which the flesh-eating eagle had dropped on the spurs of Caucasus. To make the ointment, Medea, clothed in black in the gloom of night, had drawn off this juice in a Caspian shell after bathing in 7 perennial streams and calling 7 times on Brimo, nurse of youth, it's Korotrophos, Brimo, night wanderer of the underworld, Nyctopolus Chthoniae, queen of the dead, Danasa Eneron. The dark earth shook and rumbled underneath the titan root when it was cut, and Prometheus himself groaned in the anguish of his soul. So she's calling 7 times on Hecate Brimo, who is also equated with Korotrophos, the nurse of youth, which I think is really interesting and kind of weird, as
A
well
good
as,
balance.
the night wanderer of the underworld and the queen of the dead. while she's making this salve from this plant, which sounds an awful lot like mandrake. The description of the plant is that it has purple flowers and a flesh-like root and grows about a foot tall. And I mean, that sounds a lot like mandrake. Though who knows? Makes sense in context though. But anyway, yeah, so she's calling 7 times on Brimo, nurse of youth, queen of the underworld, queen of the dead, to make this ointment that's going to make Jason invulnerable. So of course, my thought in reading this is why Brimo for this particular application? Like Jason's going into battle and making him both invulnerable to sword and fire and to surpass himself in strength and daring. That sounds a lot like fearlessness, right? Like, so that I feel like there's this association there with fear. Like he's going into this terrifying situation and he's going to be invulnerable to it. And she calls specifically on Brimo 7 times to make this magic salve. I mean, we don't have a lot more than that on why Brimo in this context. And I think it's especially curious that association Brimo Korotrophos, Brimo Nyctopolis Chthoniae, and Asa Anaron. This Brimo, the nurse of the youth. Like, why is Brimo associated with the aspect of Hecate that's a nurse of the youth? And I don't have a straight answer for that, but some of the ideas that kind of come to mind is this idea of the protective mother. Like, I mean, there's nothing more scary than a mother protecting her children, you know? But that's like all I got there. I just think it's really interesting. And so yeah, this is like one of the earliest references I could find to Hecate as Brimo in this spell. And there's actually another reference. I don't know if I made a note of it. Oh yeah, I did. About Jason. And this is really interesting too, because we were just talking about the bear charm, which we'll get to. Don't want to jump ahead, but I just made this association just now that I'm looking at this quote of Jason himself calling on Hecate Brimo. And I have the quote from it. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's long, but it starts out saying, Jason waited for the bright constellation of the bear to decline. And then when all the air from heaven to earth was still, he set out like a stealthy thief across the solitary plain. But anyway, he's doing his own little spell, his sacrifice. And I'm going to skip ahead to the Brimo bit. I just saw that bit about the bear and went, wait, the bear charm. Yeah. But he's doing a sacrifice of a sheep. He kindled the wood from underneath and poured mingled libations on the sacrifice, calling on Hecate Brimo to help him in the coming test. This done, he withdrew, and the dread goddess, hearing his words from the abyss, came up to accept the offering. She was garlanded by fearsome snakes that coiled themselves round twigs of oak. The twinkle of 1,000 torches lit the scene, and hounds of the underworld barked shrilly all around her. The whole meadow trembled under her feet, and the nymphs of marshet and river who haunt the fens of amaranthine faces cried out in fear. Jason was terrified, but even so, as he retreated, he did not once turn around. So he calls on Brimo in this sacrifice, and she shows up with the snakes and the oak twigs and the 1,000 torches and the hounds barking. And he's terrified. It's great. And the nymphs themselves are terrified. The spirits of nature, everybody's terrified when Brimo shows up. Which I don't know. I love this too. But there's Brimo being scary again. You know, that's the association there is Brimo is scary.
Well, and was that when was that written? Because it reminds me of the Orphic hymn for Hecate, talking about the snake hair and the oak leaves, and there are a lot of themes. So I'm just wondering which came first. This was
3rd century BC, and I actually saw an article, and I really wanted to dig more into it, but I didn't really have a chance to, nor did I have, unfortunately, the library access to do so this week. But suggesting that this version of the Argonautica was actually based on an earlier Orphic source of the same story. Right? Isn't that cool? So there may be this kind of Orphic thread through it, which again, I haven't had a chance to really dig into, and I would love to look into that some more. But this idea of the Argonautica, this particular version of the Argonautic that we have, is based on an earlier Orphic poem.
That's beautiful. Does this one still do Medea dirty in the end? Does she end up becoming the villain?
This version still does Medea kind of dirty, yeah.
Well, we'll definitely dig into that a little more as we dig into her character,
Yeah.
because you know, she definitely, the longer history goes, the more villainized she
Yeah.
was. Uh, there's a lot of stuff about the idea that maybe she was not quite so villainous in the
Mhm.
earliest version of these stories. But anyway, you know, that definitely doesn't. I'm not I'm not objective when it comes to that. Obviously,
Yeah.
I'm definitely cheering for Dilly. No, they did her dirty. She's really cool. Talking about spells, and I know you had a few other things to talk about, but I kind of wanted to bring it to the PGM just because it tied in so well to what you were
Yeah,
just
yeah,
talking about.
definitely, definitely.
Because for me in my end, one of the things I was looking into was the Greek Magical Papyri, which I keep on I keep on throwing out random dates for it. I actually looked it up and wrote down the dates for the collection of the PGM, ranging from 100 BC to 400 AD, which is still quite the chunk of time. And just all these different magical documents that were compiled into one big collection. And I was looking through the PGM to find how many times the word Brimo is mentioned, just to tie into this, because I know that that is one of the epithets that gets called on in a lot of traditional magic for a lot of different things. And I found 5 different spells in the PGM where she is referenced. And a lot of them, it's really cool to tie into the bear charm, because the bear charm is one of them. And before this episode, Robin and I were talking about the PGM conflates so many different deities. Like if they're bringing up Hecate, they're probably also throwing in bits of Artemis or other, or Demeter or Persephone. They kind of get mushed together. And we were looking at the bear charm, and I was talking to Robin, like, well, why does she get mentioned in the bear charm short of being conflated with Artemis, who has that bear connection, and then connecting it to the constellation of the Great Bear, the Northern Star. No, is the yeah, that is the. I was like, wait, no, Big Dipper, Small Dipper, and it's really cool that like you said, that it was mentioned in the Argonautica as a Hecatean connection still, and then thinking of it specifically Brimo, and thinking of the mama bear energy
Yeah.
that you were kind of talking about in this really protective way, coming back to Hecate. So the let's see, the 5 spells. The first one that I found in PGM was PGM 4 2241 through 2358. It is called the Document to the Waning Moon. So a, the a lot of the PGM is at best morally gray. No, it's not all. There's some really lovely and amazing things. There are some parts of the PGM that I love working with magically, um, and then there's a lot that is interesting to read, and then you're like, oh no, nobody should be doing that. Uh, I say that because anything with Brimo is usually something to do against scaring somebody into something, or protection from fear itself. The Document to the Waning Moon has you could kind of like pull out some stuff and make it less cursy because it's so open-ended. And I've actually seen people use this as a guide into the underworld, like taking different lines of it and using it is as that underworld journey, but not in its fullness, because like I said, there's some cursy bits in here. But in this one, they mentioned the name Brimo twice, once as calling to her, and another time in the barbarous words, or is it both times the barbarous words? Here, io forba Brimo sacmi nebautu soleth. Ah, I love it. So that's the first time in the PGM that they mention the name Brimo. The second time is PGM 2441 to 2621, and it's a spell of attraction. Uh, it is a it's composed. It is a spell to make somebody fall in love with you. It involves some terrible animal things, and it's a very coercive spell in general. And this is, it's not, love magic is gross. Trying to force somebody to be attracted to you is icky. And people who consider that are probably, as I was saying to Robin earlier, people who consider love magic in the first place probably are considering it because they probably are not very good boyfriends to begin with, assuming it's a male, of course. The next one is PGM for 2943 to 66. It is another spell, love spell. And this one is all about keeping the person awake because they keep on thinking about you. So it's like messing with their sleep, and like, oh, that's also not nice. But it is, very, I could see calling upon a terrifying deity to want to do that, scaring somebody into thinking about you. So again, not very warm and fuzzy. Which is that next one. Oh, and the next one is the bear charm. PGM 7686 to 702. And it's just calling on the great bear to do a thing. It's a very open-ended spell, and it's actually really fun and beautiful. I've seen people run different ways with this. In Sarah Mastros's book, The Big Book of Magical Incense, she has two spells that take parts of this. There's one initiatory thing that you're supposed to essentially dance around a fire under the light of the Northern Star. It's a really cool one, and it works with the bear charm. And there's another one which I don't quite remember from her book, but there's a lot of different ways to work with that, which is really lovely. And the last one I found was the charm of Hecate Ereshkigal against fear of punishment. And they mention her as well as the Ephesian letters, which is kind of like a charm that I don't know if it necessarily translates well from anything, but it is something that is connected to Hecate, and usually used in a sense of protection. So that makes sense that it would get put into here. Aske, Kataske, Eron, Orion, Ior, Mega, Samnir, Boy. Say that 3 times, and then Fabantia, Semne. And so this one is really interesting because at first it's protective, and then it gets more aggressive the farther it goes. Like, this is to keep somebody away, but if it doesn't keep them away, this is how to really, like, turn up the heat. And if they still don't keep away, this is how to really mess with them. So it's again, hit or miss with use. But those are the, well, six times or 5 spells that I found mentioning Brimo in the Greek Magical Papyri.
Yeah, and they all seem to have this underlying idea of fear, making
Mm-hmm.
making somebody afraid or defending against fear. And the power there is in fearlessness. And I was thinking about that in terms of how Brimo gets used in the Eleusinian Mysteries, which is not Hecate. This is Demeter, and the story of Demeter and Persephone are involved here. And Brimo as an epithet of Demeter and also of Persephone at times, in different aspects of where they are at in that story. But what we have of the mysteries is fragmentary, right? We don't really know what went on there. But one of the fragments that I found was kind of cool from the mysteries was this use of Brimo and the name Brimo as a sort of password almost. The fragment line I found was one that was like, "Save me, great Brimo." Another one was, "Brimo, enter the holy meadow, for the initiate has paid the price." Like, so there's this idea that it's this almost a password, right? Like, okay, I know this particular secret of the underworld. And the idea behind the mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries, is that by going through this ritual and this initiation, you get, it's like a pass to the afterlife, right? It's a way of dying better, and it's a way of not being afraid of death. Like, you don't have to be afraid of death anymore once you've been through the mysteries, because you have friends in the underworld. It's kind of the overall idea there. So this idea, Brimo is a sort of password into the underworld, as sort of protection from that fear, right? And it kind of ties in really interesting with this idea of Medea and her salve for invulnerability, and Jason making these sacrifices for bravery in the battle, and these PGM spells where, it's all about manipulating fear in different ways, because so much of the PGM is about manipulation. It's about using fear in different manipulative ways to get things done that you want to have done. And then sort of coming back to this idea of Brimo as the password to the underworld, and having to pass through the fear, having to face the fear and pass through it in a way that I suppose is better than what people who haven't been through that and who haven't become acquainted with Brimo in whatever aspect. So this whole sort of underlying idea of knowing Brimo, knowing Hecate Brimo is, and being allied with that fear, right? Is that it becomes it becomes a helper rather than a hinderer. It moves things. And I know one thing that you and I were both commenting on was how difficult it's been for us to find the time to get together to make this episode. We're a week late, and we keep having these things come up, and that has been my experience every time I've done any kind of working with Hecate Brimo, is that everything gets disrupted, everything gets changed around. Not necessarily in a bad way. I mean, working with Hecate Brimo, it's the kind of thing where suddenly you find yourself breaking up with your abusive boyfriend, or you get fired from your job, but your job was terrible and it was bad for you anyway, and you needed a new job, or, that kind of thing, that kind of disruption in your life, but in areas that really kind of needed to be disrupted.
Yeah.
That has been completely my experience with Brimo, and I think it's really funny that that's also been kind of our experience in getting this out.
Clearing away that which does not serve. Almost. It's like, kind of that tower energy, if you're into tarot, when we're talking about tarot, a lot of times when you're looking at the tower card, it's clearing away this tower that was built in a really stupid spot anyway. So that's a Brimo energy, clearing away this thing that really shouldn't have been built in the first place, or no longer serves you. It is, it's clearing away that which you no longer need. Usually, it's not just wanton destruction. It's not just, well, we're just gonna destroy everything. And not to say that some of the thing, for me on my end, my part of Vermont just got hit by some terrible flooding, and that was, my road got washed away, and so that necessarily wasn't like a needful thing. Maybe, hopefully, a needful wake up on road construction and furthering climate change, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, Brimo is an interesting energy to be working with, and she shows up in a very certain way.
Yeah, I know Jason Miller has this warning, and I can personally attest to it being a very valid warning that don't work with Brimo if you can't afford to have your life disrupted. If you need stability for whatever reason, even if your life isn't great, but you need it to stay stable because of, maybe you have responsibilities, or, you have things that really require stability, be careful working with Brimo, because she's gonna shake things up. And that has also been my experience.
She's definitely not about stability and keeping things the same just because it's easy.
Yeah. Yes.
That's not her thing. That's not her thing. That definitely is true. But still very useful. And that kind of starts going into our connection and to Brimo, how we might use her in a magical practice. But if you need a hard reset, my gosh, this is the epithet that you need in your life. Or if you're just kind of feeling stuck, Brimo can help that stuckness. It might be a little more wild than you might have bargained for, but it is, yeah, it can bring in she can bring in some wild energy with that. And if you're looking for something to call on for fear, because you were talking about how fear comes up, if you need something to strengthen your courage or to clear out to really look at what needs to be cleared out in your life, this is the perfect epithet to call on, because that's she shows up really well for that.
And also
Whether,
for these, yeah, also for this context of kind of going into battle, which for most of us is entirely metaphorical, but when we are, when we have to go into a situation, like if I, for some reason, knock on wood, had to go to court for something, I would be talking to
yeah.
Brimo the day before, because that's something that's scary, right? It's something that's intimidating, and it's something that you need to win. And
Right.
you get into those kinds of situations where you really need that extra courage, right? That feeling of invulnerability. Brimo can also help with that. Though if I was going to court and I was guilty, I probably would not be calling on Brimo.
Yeah. Again, that necessary clearing away, I don't think that would necessarily work out.
Yeah.
But I think that going into any kind of conflict,
Yeah.
if you were going to a situation where you knew you needed to stand your ground and you knew that you needed to stand up against something, Brimo would definitely be the epithet to call on to do this, to do a prayer to Hecate Brimo to to make you as terrifying, as you need to be in this situation. That kind of goes to that spell to Hecate Ereshkigal that was all about protection that I was talking about, that kind of escalates the situation. But especially the beginning of that, it's really about embodying this. Well, it started with Hecate Ereshkigal, the mix of Hecate and Ereshkigal. Oh gosh, help me out, Robin. What culture is Ereshkigal from?
It's
I'm having
actually
such
a
a
Sumerian goddess.
Sumerian. That's what I
Yeah.
thought. Okay,
Yeah.
I just didn't want to. Yep, Sumerian underworld goddess, and both deities you don't want to mess with, and then add Brimo into that. It's kind of like embodying that energy. You'll definitely be putting out a "don't mess with me" kind of vibe.
Yeah. And also, I've heard this kind of anecdotally before, and I'm kind of putting it together now with that spell from Medea, where she also calls on Korotrophos, is for magic to protect children. Like I've known people who've been in a situation where, I don't want to get into specifics, but it was basically a situation where they knew of a child who was being abused and they wanted to do something to protect the child. And Hecate Brimo is who they called on, and it worked really, really well.
That is absolutely going back to that protective mother aspect.
Yeah.
Going to the mama bear, and this idea that she will show up to protect the innocent. And again, I imagine in that situation it was probably a little chaotic as it was unfolding, but it was leading to something better. And that's definitely Brimo's vibe. And
it led to the child not being in the
very
situation anymore, which was what was
right.
needed. Yeah.
Right. So that's definitely an interesting, useful, powerful, and amazing epithet and current of Hecatean power to call on, but not necessarily a energy that you want to be hanging out in every day, all the time, every minute of your life, because you need a little bit of stability. You can't just continually be a force of destruction. You need a little bit of balance in your life. But absolutely, I'm trying to think of any other ways that, maybe specific magical ways I could suggest calling on her for any of the listeners. I think well, we've kept it kind of open-ended. I think people could still figure out how to work with a lot of that, or even getting, if you haven't gotten a copy of the Greek Magical Papyri, which was edited by Hans Dieter Betz, please do. Sit down and read a little bit. Look at some of the ones I've mentioned. And as I said, there's probably, I'm going to be generous and say 2/3 of this person there nobody wants to do for a myriad of of moral reasons, but you can always think laterally and be like, all right, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do this in my bubble, my moral bubble. So how can you, if how could you translate, doing something in a way that's not awful, or I guess any love spells, just drop it because just don't. If you want to attract love, make yourself more lovable. That's usually the better. Don't try to force a specific person to feel ways about you because you wouldn't want somebody to do it to you. Well, that's the golden rule there. But looking at those different spells, you could figure out different ways to work with them, in different ways to find some inspiration to find protection, children protection, as Robin said, calling on both Brimo and Quadratrophus. And yeah, that's it. And Brimo has a lot of more unsavory bits, as we had mentioned from some of the stuff in the Greek in the PGM, but we're going to focus on the savory on the helpful bits and the non-cursy stuff. But there's a lot of ways to chase away your fear and to find protection. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only other thing I had in my notes about her, there's something with Brimo being connected, going, I believe, to post Iliad, Queen Hecuba, the wife of King Priam in
Yeah,
Troy.
yeah.
There's a lot of stories about after the whole the Troy saga,
Mhm.
how Queen Hecuba is turned into a Hecatean hound. And all these,
Yes.
like, there's all these different ways of her getting there. And that was somehow connected to Brimo. And I was trying to follow the train of thought, but what I was reading wasn't very clear on it. I don't know if you have any
I
more
don't have
information
a
on
whole
that.
lot of that specifically on Hecuba and Brimo. But Hecuba
Hmm.
is another one of these really just fascinating, powerful female figures from, you know, um, Greek literature. She was the wife of the king of Troy, King Priam. And yeah, after the battle, spoilers, they lost. She she became part of Hecate's retinue. She got a lot of the stories have her as turned into a large black dog, and
Hmm.
there are accounts of her coming to people as a large black dog, um, which is a whole other interesting set of stories. But I actually don't know a specific Brimo connection there, but that would be really
Okay.
cool if there was one.
I think there
Say there's a lot of
was, but
stories. There's a lot of stories, so there may be. I'm sure there's something out there.
there's something about her calling on Hecate Brimo, or I wasn't quite sure. So, and like I said, I was reading. It was poorly. It did not have the needed bibliography. It was poorly sourced. So I was hoping that maybe you might know something about it, but
Definitely an
well,
interesting idea to look into.
it's something to continue to dig into. I love it.
Yeah,
Well, that I think covers it.
yeah.
Thank you for being here and listening to our talk on Brimo. If we missed anything, or if there's something else about Brimo that you are excited about and you want to hear about, or you want to tell us about, reach out to us. We are on Facebook. We are on Instagram. You can find us there. Comment on something, send us something. We're always looking for more information because there's always something that we don't know or we're missing, or maybe we misspoke, or all of that. We're still we're forever learning, all of us, and it's always interesting to hear other people's perspective and information that other people might have that we might have missed. Next episode, we are going to be talking about Dracana. Dracana? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, close enough.
Okay, making sure I got the nod from Robin. Uh, we were talking about Dracana, which ties back into Medea, which I'm excited to get a little deeper into. So that's going to be a lot of fun for both of us. And well, until then, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you later.